Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.
Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Joe Salustio back with you again, and something I would like to make your business is for you to take a look at our book, Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, that's now available for pre-order on Amazon. Self-plug, self-plug, self-plug. I'll get to it as fast as I humanly can. And please remember to check out our website, www.edupexperience.com. We think it's possible that we will have 200,000 downloads by the end of the year and have interviewed over 200 presidents. So our goal has 200 to it, 200 presidents, 200,000 downloads, and we're very excited. One of the ways we're going to get there is we are going to bring together amazing people and put them in amazing situations and intersections here at EdUp Experience, and they didn't even know what was going to happen. And that's what makes these fun. And so I've got a first-time guest and a first-time guest co-host, which you know I love these episodes when you can connect people like this. Let me bring in my guest co-host. He's, needless to say, he's doing big things, ladies and gents. Serious. He is Greg Brown, and he is president at Udemy. Greg, what's happening?
Joe, good to be back. Had so much fun on my episode. Couldn't pass up the opportunity to come back and co-host with you. So it's great to be here.
Thanks for coming, man. You start out on one side, get interviewed, and the next thing you know, you're interviewing here at the EdUp Experience. It's great to have you here. We hear when we see great things happening at Udemy. You're serving so many businesses out there in terms of training and development. How's business going? How's the company?
Yeah, we really are very fortunate to be able to serve so many organizations and learners. And look, through a very difficult macroeconomic environment, we're doing well, and feel very, very fortunate to be able to help as many folks as we can. So, business is good, and expect that to continue.
Good, man. Well, we're going to talk a lot about what's happening in K-12 education today with one of the innovators out there. She's innovating like crazy. She comes from an organization doing big things to help communities and schools. Let me bring her in right now. Here she is. She's Katie Boody Adorno, and she's CEO of Lean Lab Education. Katie, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Did you know, Katie, that you would get an applause before you even said a word? That's my first question for you.
No, great hospitality.
There it is. All right. Anyway, we always like to level set here on the EdUp Experience. Katie, just start talking about Lean Lab Education. What do you guys do, and how do you do it? Where are you located?
Yeah, great. Good questions. I'll start with the easy one. We're located in Kansas City, Missouri, so we're a little bit unique in the sense that we're in the heart of America. What we do is essentially we do research and development for early stage education technology products focused in K-12. We have a network of test bed schools or pilot schools, and essentially we work at running clinical trials for early EdTech solutions. But the way in which we do that, we think is rather unique, which I'll get into more.
Yeah, you're going to get into that. I'm going to ask you, first of all, I'm in St. Louis, which it feels like I should drive out there sometime and record live from the offices of Lean Lab Education. I don't know if that's imposing myself, but it is fun to do on location shoots, Katie, so you can disregard my self-invitation if you'd like, but that would be fun. Secondarily to that, K-12 education, we know this at the higher ed level, the disruption has been pretty incredible. Needless to say, and I don't need to get into the details of why that is the case. I think everybody knows, but you've seen disruption in teaching, disruptions in learning, staffing. Like there are no teachers, and technology and innovating in technology, investing in technology companies is an important way to, bridge some of those gaps. And you just wonder, are there going to ever be enough teachers anymore? And if not, how can technology solve some of those problems? What are your thoughts around everything I just said?
Oh man, it's a lot. I mean, our ecosystem and our industry have been fundamentally disrupted the last 3 years, and it comes from we have to rethink how we treat our talent pool, so how we treat educators, how we prepare them, how we innovate insofar as instructional materials and delivery. So how are students experiencing education? How are they experiencing and engaging and learning? And then we have to really think about where and how we're reaching students. I think that just has changed enormously. We saw kids go home, we saw them come back, we've tried hybrid environments. Just how are we doing this whole learning thing has been kind of fundamentally questioned. And now to add greater complexity to that, I think we've also seen systemic inequities are threatening to widen. As students return to school, we had a substantial learning loss. This has disproportionately impacted students of color, students living in poverty, rural communities, et cetera. Yep. So now we have to figure out how not only do we grapple with all these complexities of a changing environment, but how do we accelerate learning, especially for our most vulnerable students, so that we have a next generation that is more equitably prepared for everything that's going on in industry in the world.
Well, somebody that knows a little bit about what's going on in industry and teaching and learning is my co-host, Greg Brown. And Greg, I'll pass it over to you for questions you may have.
Yeah, I've got a number of questions. The first one I have is, what are the biggest areas of opportunity for EdTech companies like ours and others to better understand and then invest in helping to bridge some of the gaps that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, I think about it in different buckets. We have to innovate to make teaching easier. That's one area that just has to happen. We are seeing attrition, and we're also seeing record, I think, just dissatisfaction. So I think some of and there's some research that's been done about this, some of the attrition we're seeing has been overstated. And actually what's actually going on is then coming back to the classroom, and with federal recovery funds, schools are doubling down on interventionists, on bringing in tutoring programs to catch kids back up. So sometimes what we see is not so much that so many teachers have left, although we are seeing increased attrition, but that the demand for educators is outpacing the supply, and we don't have enough teachers going through education programs, and we don't have enough teachers being retained in the system. So we have to think of ways of how to do that better. So I think one area, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and as you're probably leading there, is, and how can technology help with that? Right. That's interesting for all of us that are on the EdTech side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an educational perspective, and where kind of your work comes in, Greg, is how might we better prepare educators? So I think there's some fascinating work leveraging VR and AR in terms of teacher preparation. That's happening in terms of how do we accelerate the way that you're prepared for the realities of the classroom? How might we create better instructional materials? It's a lot of our work at Lean Lab. So how do we create more elegant technology that can fit into the day-to-day realities or the workflow that's really dynamic in an actual school setting? Other things are how might we automate particularly burdensome day-to-day things in a teacher's life: grading, scheduling, class interruptions, the bus being late, these things that technology, I think, can streamline to just help their days go easier. I think that's one area that gets overlooked a lot, because sometimes I think it's not as sexy, but I think actually could make some of the biggest differences from an instructional day. So those are some areas that immediately come to mind. But I think also we are also seeing just industry at large. I mean, attrition from workforce is happening everywhere. So how do we make, and education is not unique in that sense. I think what's unique about education is that it doesn't benefit from some of the flexibility of other work environments. The bell schedule is what the bell schedule is. Kids have to arrive when they have to arrive. So how might you bring some of the new thinking of how we humanize the workplace into the education sector as well?
I think it makes a lot of sense. The point you made about taking some of maybe the more rudimentary and mundane tasks away from teachers and enabling them to do what they love to do, which is teach, and leverage technology to bridge some of that makes a lot of sense, especially as most of the ratios for teachers across the country are going up, right? They've got more kids in their classrooms than they've ever had before on average. So I think the more we can help take some of those those rudimentary tasks off their plate, it's going to free them up and hopefully help with retention and also the quality of the experience they can provide the learners in the classroom. So that's great. Do you have an example of a partnership that you facilitated that you feel like really just hits the mark from both sides, from the tech side as well as from the classroom side?
Yeah, I mean, I have two that I go back to because I think they're fabulous companies, and they're earlier stage startups. But I can give one example from kind of that unsexy logistics problem, and then one that's more instructional. But from that point, I mean, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but some of the second to teacher leaving headlines, I would say, are headlines related to school buses. Um, they are typically the investment in student transportation is typically the second most expensive line item in a school district's budget next to staffing. So I mean, this is a huge industry. It's a huge investment. And it's also a huge pain point. I think if you talk to any administrator, you ask them, especially particularly this time of year, the beginning of the school year, what's eating up their mornings and their days. And they're like, man, the bus drivers didn't show up. The bus was late. The route was wrong. I got parents yelling, calling, screaming at me that their kid never got picked up or they don't know where they are, blah, blah, blah. And then they're notoriously hard to staff. I mean, bus driver turnover is really huge. It's a huge problem. It's an expensive problem, et cetera. So, and also not to talk, and now like to layer over it, fuel prices, inefficient routing. I mean, this is just a huge thing. I think we've seen a lot of advancements in other sectors around efficient transportation, but it hasn't translated over to education. So one of the companies that we incubated several years ago now is actually called Transportant. And they were initially got into the work of how might we make finding students more, tracking students in their transportation journey more efficient and effective. So kind of think about like Live 360 for student transportation. You can see where your kiddo is, you can participate when they get dropped off, when they arrive, et cetera. There's an admin view where you can see them coming to. As I got deeper into the pain point and working with transportation directors in schools, they realized that they needed to make the driver retention and driver quality was the bigger factor and what was leading to kids arriving on time. So how might they make the driver experience better and also the writing experience safer for students? So what they've ended up with is a hardware software solution that has cameras in a school bus. So you can see how, school buses are also rampant places for misbehavior. So you can see
bullying and all sorts of stuff, right? And
yes,
burning the seats with the lighter. I never did that by the record.
Right. So not only do administrators, before the school day even starts, before you can begin instruction, not only are you wondering where the hell is the bus, but they typically come in with, well, so-and-so hit me and so-and-so got lost and whatever. And it's like, and you lose half the day to navigating that. So now you have a camera you can see, and the administrator can actually audio into the school bus and then announce, hey, I can see you, Tommy, sit down. Like, put away the lighter, et cetera. And then also it gives the real-time routing software. So the bus driver, it creates an easier way for the bus driver to onboard, learn their routes, learn their kids, get them to school, et cetera. So that's one example of something that I think has the potential to just, if you can start that school day ahead or at least on time, that's a huge win. And I think that's one leverage point to do it.
Oh, yeah.
That's what a teacher says when they start their day ahead, right? Katie, how pro or con is K-12 innovation? When you think about helping a school and you try to implement a technology or study a technology, is there wide adoption? Because in higher education, of course, we don't like to adopt many things, and we've had a pandemic help us get there. But how's the K-12 adoption cycle when you're talking about technology and innovation?
I mean, I think similar to higher ed, the pandemic really accelerated adoption in terms of, I think we see a lot more technology used by teachers now, pre-2020, in terms of just their day-to-day. They got, they're just more fluent. I think what we tend to see with K-12, which isn't very different than higher ed, is it's built on a fairly rigid, some might argue, archaic system. So you still have seat time, you still have, in secondary, 8-class bell schedule, 50-minute increments, high stakes testing. And some of that lends itself, I think, to a certain level of risk averseness, particularly on the accountability side from administrators, because it's high stakes. So to adopt a new thing or to try or something that's radically different feels very high stakes.
Nailed it.
Yeah. So I think it's that when we tend to see lag of adoption, it's not so much because of desire or an acknowledgement that things need to change. It's more so, what's the opportunity cost if this doesn't work out? What might happen? That's more what I would say we see.
In your About Us section, I'll pass it back to you, Greg, in a sec, but you have a sentence that reads, "We study how well EdTech tools work in real classroom environments." Can you talk about how you study that and what the results look like and how you then take those results and who you communicate them to and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So fundamentally, before I even get to that, the precursor for that is our theory of change, and our unshakable belief is that the future of education should be influenced and formed by those closest to it: students, educators, and families, school communities. And unique to the education sector is that oftentimes in tech, your buyer is not your user. So oftentimes what's happening, particularly in K-12, is that you have solutions coming in and being purchased by senior level administrators in a district office and then being used by third graders, kindergartners, a teacher. Very different user profiles. So that's what led us to found Lean Lab under this idea of how do we make product development and evaluation serve both those distinct profiles. So how that works is we have a network of pilot schools. These are schools that have raised their hand and said, hey, we're willing to try something new. And we're willing to give you access to the ground floor of who's most impacted. So classrooms, parent community, wherever it needs to live. And then on the other side, we have companies that typically come in earlier stages of development, although we do some later stage evaluation work. And they're saying, hey, we want to understand how to make this the best tool possible for the user. How do we really make this a valuable experience and make sure that what doesn't happen, what happens to a lot of ed tech is that the product gets renewed, it gets purchased at the system level layer, but because it's not an elegant user experience solving a real pain point for the classroom, it'll sit on the shelf and maybe it gets renewed, maybe it doesn't. So our goal is really, how do we make these products really usable first? And then how do we ensure that they're really impactful? So that comes into evaluation. So how do we evaluate? We get data share agreements with schools, we can do correlational analysis, we can do quasi-experimental studies, et cetera. Depending on the stage of development and usage, to really understand how these products might be related to the student learning that's happening in the classroom. And to do that, we have our own in-house research team that does that work.
Yeah, you just gave me those hot flashes you get down your back when you start talking about correlational analysis and ANOVAs and all that stuff. I'm glad there's great people out there that love that kind of work, because I was like, oh God, what do I do with all that? Greg, over to you.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating and wonderful work that you all are doing. What are the biggest challenges you're facing right now? It sounds like you've done a great job identifying a small set of schools that are very open to experimenting and pushing the envelope. But that being said, what are the divides that you're trying to address? What are the biggest challenges that you're trying to address that would help this, just improve and expedite your ability to connect the dots with EdTech and schools?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's an interesting challenge. So what's interesting about us is that we're the only research organization that has, in K-12, that has activated pilot schools. Everyone else, when they typically do research on an EdTech product, the product is coming with their research participants. So they're saying, hey, we've had this existing relationship with New York City Public Schools for 5 years. We want to do a study there or whatever, right? And we think that that's great and that's valuable research, but what we're interested in is more of this unbiased research where you're really introducing a product to a community that hasn't experienced it before. And so a big challenge that we currently have, and it's with the influx of EdTech that came the last couple of years, is that the demand for this work is outpacing our supply of research-ready schools. It takes a lot to make this work really authentic. to make the research participants really feel that their expertise is valued, which is something we care a lot about, is elevating their expertise here and doing what we call co-design. We have to expand how many schools are able to participate in this work. What's challenging there is, I'm not sure if you all heard, schools have been fairly disrupted the last few years. They've gone through some change. And so how to do that at scale and how to do that in a way that retains the integrity of the relationship of the school is really hard to do. So I think we're figuring it out. We've made some great new hires. We're getting some more resources there, but there's just no shortcut. It's just hard work. I don't know how else to say it, but that's one big challenge we're facing right now. And the fact, and that's layered on top of a deeper one, is that the kind of work we're doing hasn't quite been done before at this scale. So there's just like K-12 schools just were not built for rapid cycle evaluations or rapid.
What?
They just weren't. So I think in that is, yes, we need more schools, but we also have to think about a scalable infrastructure that can allow for this more kind of rapid type evaluation of emerging technologies at a pace that can really help us get products to market in a way that's more efficient. That's a huge challenge.
Fierce Education is the place where higher education leaders, administrators, and faculty, and those driving technology adoption decisions in education can access proven methods and best practices as they rethink pedagogy and business models in the new blended learning world. Through its website, www.fierceeducation.com, virtual events, and newsletters, Fierce Education focuses on rethinking higher education in a blended learning world. Fierce Education's key tenets are to use technology for teaching better and reaching learners everywhere, addressing business model changes required to move forward, and workforce preparation for adult learners who are out to reskill. That's www.fierceeducation.com. Well, let me jump in here, guys, because this is the time of the episode here at the EdUp Experience. We like to have play a little in-episode game, if you will. Well, it's a game for you guys. I'll be the host because answering or being a part of it is way harder than hosting it. So here we go. This is another episode within the episode of we usually call it Higher Ed Word Association, but today we're going to call it Education Word Association. And this, Katie and Greg, is where I give you a word, and you're going to tell me what this word means to you or your organization. Please elaborate, or else it makes for a really horrible episode of word association. And I'm going to start with Greg because we like our guest host to really screw it up before we give it to our host. So we're going to start with Greg. I'm going to give you a set of words or a word, Greg, and you tell me what this means to you, what it means to you to me. Ready?
Sure.
All right. Measuring impact.
High priority for Udemy. In fact, measuring impact and specifically outcomes that we can deliver to organizations large and small is a strategic imperative for us right now, especially as we're coming out of COVID and into the economic conditions we're in right now. Now more than ever, organizations, the investments they're making, they want and need to understand what the impact is going to be of those investments. So big priority for us.
Same one to you, Katie. Measuring impact.
I mean, imperative. It's the basis of everything we do. If we're putting things in front of school or in front of students in high stakes settings, we need to know to what extent it works and provides value.
Okay, now you got the hang of it, Katie, so you get to go first this time. Here we go. Co-designed curriculum, co-designed learning. Either way.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? That means a process where there's shared power, and respected expertise on both ends. So for me, that means that students and teachers would have equal say in how something should be designed with a developer or researcher who's also designing it.
Okay, Greg, there you go. Co-design learning.
Yeah, for us, because we work with so many organizations that are really trying to tailor and develop their own learning paths and learning journeys for their employees, it's a big area of investment for us and has been for a long time to have the ability to sit down with a chief learning officer and understand what they're trying to accomplish, the outcomes they're trying to drive, and then co-design or co-develop specific learning paths and learning journeys for the different constituents or groups of employees that they have in the organization to reach the strategic outcomes that they're trying to drive for the various lines of business and then overall for the entire organization. So again, another big area of focus for us and big area of opportunity as well.
All right. Well, this last one, I feel like you're both going to crush this one. Katie, we're going over you for partnerships. Partnerships. What does that mean to Lean Lab?
Oh, partnerships. I think it goes back to mission. I think it goes back to who are your key allies that can help you, that have symbiotic missions and strategies that can help you go farther together. So when I think about that, sometimes that's external. That might be a organization that might be perceived as a competitor, but can help you get to the mission faster. Or that can be internal. What teams do we need to work more closely and partner together on a key initiative? Yeah.
All right, Greg, partnerships.
Yeah. First thing I thought of was just critical to our success. We're the preeminent learning content provider in the market today. But for us to be successful, we have to have the ability to partner with the learning experience platforms and learning management systems and all the various technologies that organizations, large and small, use to deliver learning to their employees. And it's critical for us to make our content and the experience in the flow of work for employees, so they don't have to go to another website, they don't have to go to another location to access content when they need it to develop their skills. And it's all about skills development. And so we work very hard on the partnerships that enable us to literally live in the flow of work for employees and to increase adoption and make it really easy for them to access the content they need to improve their lives.
Love that. Well, as usual, we have to go to the judges because there has to be a declared winner of this game. Unfortunately for you, Greg, no matter what your answers are, it's impossible for a guest host to win. So did Katie win?
100%.
Katie, you've won today. Very well done. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes another episode of Word Association, this time with education. All right, Greg, over to you now. I've taken enough time. You can keep going on your questions.
Yeah, Katie. So if you had one ask of the audience that we have, as Dr. Joe mentioned, we've got, a wonderful, and broad group of folks that tune in. What would that message be? How could the folks in the audience either most effectively help you on the mission that you're on, and or what insight could you provide that would give them a broader understanding as to maybe where they could help in the future?
Yeah, I mean, one straightforward one is help us get the word out. We've been a small organization, kind of a sleeper here in the Midwest. So, follow us on social media, get the word out, go to our website.
That we can help with. We're going to help with that one, Katie. We got you.
Thank you. And then another concrete one, I think, is more for school administrators. Really a call to action to look at, it's okay. In fact, we encourage you to ask the EdTech providers coming in what their evidence base is, encourage them, tell them that you care about to what extent they're measuring impact and measuring how their product is serving their users as well as the students themselves. So I think that's one big call to action from the school administrator side, and that transcends K-12, that goes into higher ed as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that. Go ahead, Greg. You know, another one? Looks like you're ready to fire another missile.
Go for it.
Katie, one of the questions I have, it's you go back to the teachers just for a second, and you mentioned it at the beginning, closing the achievement gaps, and you have a big part of your mission is serving the underserved, and going back to teachers, if you don't have enough teachers, it's hard to close any achievement gaps. If so it's kind of like chicken or egg, but you do have this a part of your mission that's like, let's close the achievement gaps for lower income students that have a harder time accessing education. What is that? How broad is that achievement gap from your eyes? We hear it in higher ed a lot. We hear there's achievement gap and we're not serving the student, that student. But at that point, the student has completed some level of education. And so, yes, there's still challenges. But what does it look like when you pull back the cover, so to speak, on K-12? And how big do you see the achievement gap being when you look at schools?
Yeah. I mean, I was just writing about this and with updated data last night. So it's fresh up top of mind. But I mean, I'll give you some comparison. So pre-pandemic, in my background is I was an educator. I taught middle school math for 5 years in Kansas City public schools, and then helped open a charter school serving predominantly low-income students and Black and Latinx student populations. At that point, when I went into the classroom in 2008, the common stat was about 33% of our students were reading on grade level by third grade in our city schools. So you can imagine, so in comparison to what was typically state average at that point in time was around 70%. So you're looking at a pretty significant gap. Fast forward to now, what we've seen is that gap has widened post-pandemic. It's widened disproportionately for students of color and those living in poverty. A most recent report that just came out by NWEA. NWEA is an adaptive assessment software that many schools use across the United States. It's normed nationally, and it measures student growth in academics and math and reading. What we're seeing from a recent report that they just came out with was that student learning has, to some degree, rebounded since pandemic, so this last academic year. However, what we're seeing is that in students, it's not sufficient for them to end high school on time. And I think this has large impact for post-secondary. So what we're seeing right now is that it might take more than 5 years for kids in grades 4 through 9 to catch up, more than 5 years for them to just get back on pace with where they're supposed to be. So that's pretty significant. And and again, it's disproportionately impacting students in Black and Latinx and Indigenous students living in poverty and rural communities. And it's disproportionately impacting actually math and later grades, students in the later grades. So that's kind of where we're seeing the disparity. So yeah, we have some work to do.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of work. I was reading your teacher sentiment report that you put out, the 2022 teacher sentiment, and looking at the challenges specifically. And I was surprised, actually. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but you wonder if some of those things, at least in my mind, would have been higher with student behavior, student social emotional health, and virtual to in-person transition being the 3 top challenges that schools are working with. I don't know that I would have thought the virtual to in-person transition would have been that high, but now when you actually think about that, the reassimilation of youth out of a house, and we've talked about it for higher ed, you think about the community college level or college level with community college with commuter students, where when schools closed, you were putting them back in an environment that may not have been healthy. And then you go down to the lower levels of higher ed and you wonder what the household environment was like and how to reassimilate. That's a big lift for schools that I feel like we don't talk about, nobody's talking about enough, is how do you reassimilate this many students back into some kind of semblance of a schedule and normalcy?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually been the largest focus of our body of work and research the last 2 years has been social emotional learning tools. I mean, it's been the number one thing we can't get out of a school without saying, the reassimilation piece is a great point, but like kids did not come back okay. Teachers are not okay, many of them. And fundamentally, you have to deal with that first. We have to find interventions. We have to find tools that work. We need to find evidence-based interventions and tools that work and can scale and can be sustained so that kids can actually learn and teachers can actually teach.
Katie, have you identified any of those types of tools that you're planning on exploring value and impact?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've studied probably half a dozen, and I wouldn't be best positioned to say which is best, but I would say, I mean, what we've learned consistently about it is that consistent usage and adoption is really important. So things like integrating data checkpoints around social emotional awareness and into teacher meetings daily or weekly does have evidence, does benefit student and well-being in classroom environment. So there are many different tools out there that are on the market, some even free, where teachers can onboard students and have them do essentially daily wellness check-ins and say, how are you feeling today? What support might you need? You can automate that and that will report data trends. And what we do know does work is looking at those trends daily, weekly, as a whole school, and really starting to create an environment that's data-driven around social emotional well-being, a sense of belonging, and targeting interventions that help elevate that sense of well-being.
I think that's a great message for the audience. Some of the more progressive corporations we saw doing those types of things, through COVID and coming out of COVID. But, as we've already talked about, the education environment is typically not the most progressive, environment that we're all exposed to. So therefore, for the folks listening, I think it's a great point. And we've seen exactly the same thing in companies, in our organization, organizations at large, is that, everybody has struggled. Leadership all the way down to, the front line, with how to balance, not only when we went away, but coming back. And we're still dealing with it. I mean, right now, as an organization, we're still not back in offices full time. We're still grappling with what the right balance is going to be for us going forward. And most companies are. So I can only imagine the impact it's having on these young kids that, have less, have lived less, have less perspective, less, understanding about what they're going through, and the fact that this is not normal. Nobody's ever been through anything like this before, so we don't have a blueprint, and we need to focus on diligently, supporting all of our employees, all of our students on an ongoing basis in whatever way we can.
Well, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is I love this conversation because, boy, I have kids, and many of us, I know many listeners out there have kids, and there's always this, you want to do what's best for your kids, and you want to get them the best learning environment they can have, and the teachers that are disrupted, it's all a cycle. We got to make sure all parts of that cycle are strong. And the work you're doing, Katie, is helping to do that through technology and innovation, and it's much appreciated. And you said get the word out, so we're going to do that for you as much as possible. But I'm going to go to Greg and ask Greg if he has any final questions before I close out our episode and give Katie our final 2 questions.
Yeah, Katie, I think if there was one message you wanted to leave the audience with, what would that be? One ask is probably a better way to frame it. If you had an ask.
Oh, man. I would say evidence matters. I mean, really looking at what tools work, what doesn't, and really looking at how things were designed and how they might work in school environments is really important. So don't overlook that.
You keep saying that. You said data-driven, evidence-based, data-driven, evidence-based. You said it 4 or 5 different times. There is an implication, and I said I wouldn't ask any more questions, but I have to. There's an implication. Is it possible that K-12 schools are not looking at that data often enough, or maybe not focusing on what the story the data is telling? Is there a reason why you're really doubling down on talking about data-driven, evidence-based results?
I think it's a matter of overwhelm, and I think it's a matter of new entrants into what's historically been a deregulated or underregulated area, which is tech. So I think, you have overwhelm. What typically happens in an EdTech sales cycle, and K-12 at least, is that you have overwhelm. Let's say social emotional learning, for instance. Like there's an overwhelming need. Kids are not okay. You see this. You are going to go look for a solution. And you don't necessarily know that you could drill a little bit deeper, ask questions around, okay, how is this going to work into my tech stack? What evidence have you done? What trials have you run? What foundational research is this based off of? Have you done any third-party research? I mean, those are things that you can and should ask, because these are federal funds that are being deployed at a pretty significant level at this point, that you should expect more from what's entering classrooms.
That's a good message. Don't be afraid to ask for the evidence before you move forward. Well, I'm going to ask you, Katie, our final 2 questions that we close every episode with. Number 1, what did we not say about Lean Lab education that you want to say? Maybe something that's coming up, innovation that you have in deployment, a speaking gig that you have coming up, anywhere we might be able to catch more about Lean Lab. You can drop your website, whatever you do. So basically self-plug like I did at the beginning of the episode. Just do that. And then number 2, what do you see as the future of education?
Oh, good questions. First one, self-plug. Website, I have a Substack called Ground Shifts. That's all about all the nerdy data and logic models I've been pouring into at night. So subscribe to that on Substack. If you want more granular information, it comes out once a month. And then and go to our website, leanlabeducation.org, or at leanlabed on Twitter. In terms of, what was the other question? What's the future?
What was the super easy one? What's the future of education going to look like?
Right, what's that one going to look like? I think a lot more dynamic. And what I mean is that I think we've already started experimenting with hybrid, asynchronous solutions, virtual solutions, et cetera. I think out of necessity, we're going to have to get a lot more expansive in our concept of how and where learning occurs, that it can occur at home, that tutoring can happen virtually, that intervention can happen maybe through an app sometimes, and that learning experiences in person might be facilitated differently, that you might have, some content that's online, and then you're focusing your time in person more around connection and team building and experience. So I think dynamic is what we'll see.
I love it. And I love this combination of people on this episode. You guys kicked some serious butt. I was going to say the other word, but then I'd have to mark this as an episode with the, that you have to PG-13 or whatever. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, Greg, I'm going to ask you first. How was your first co-hosting episode of the EdUp Experience?
Oh, I loved it. Look, I love this conversation as well. I come from a family of educators. My dad was a teacher his entire career, and my brother was a teacher and is now a principal. So, by the way, if you need a school in California to be a test school, I've got a guy that will be open to considering that. So
we know a guy who knows a guy, Katie.
We know a guy who knows a guy.
Yes,
exactly.
It's definitely a priority area.
So reach out to me offline. But no, I love the work you're doing. Very passionate about changing lives through learning. That's our mission here, and you're doing exactly that. So it's been a great conversation, and let us know how we can help as we go forward.
Thank you so much.
Katie, how was your EdUp experience today? A little surprise of Greg coming on to talk to you, and some in-episode blunders that we make with sound effects. They're sometimes 2 to 3 seconds late, but I think you get the point. Did you have fun?
I had a great time. Thank you. And it was a great surprise, maybe a little nervous, but
you did great.
Okay.
You did great. Ladies and gentlemen, my co-host, of course, you know him. He's Greg Brown, and he is the president at Udemy. If you haven't heard of Udemy, then you haven't been listening. And of course, my special guest today, she has got amazing flowers on her desk, and she is passionate about K-12 education and innovation in technology. Here she is. She's Katie Boody Adorno. She's CEO of Lean Lab Education. Katie, thank you so much for coming on the EdUp Experience today.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Fierce Education targets higher education leaders, administrators, and faculty, and those driving technology adoption decisions in this new blended learning world. Go to www.fierceeducation.com for all the latest news, tips, and successful case studies of what higher education institutions are doing to better student engagement, ensure equal access, and improve the assessment process. That's www.fierceeducation.com.